What you're about to watch is a clip from my BrandLytics training where I get together with entrepreneurs, thought leaders who want to build their brand using YouTube and making data-driven decisions to blow up their brand this year. Enjoy.
Now, I'm going to walk you through the process that I go through with my clients and how I approach testing. And I wanted to start by when does it make sense to actually start split testing? This is kind of the outline for the process that we're going to be looking at. I'm going to give you some guidelines of where does your channel need to be at in order to start this process? When does it actually make sense? Obviously, this is additional time and effort that it's going to take on your end. And if your channel is not already humming on all cylinders from a release schedule perspective, it might not necessarily make sense to start this process right here and right now. And then we're going to talk about using some of the data within our back end in order to figure out what makes sense to test. And then we'll talk a little bit about testing design, how to think through what type of test you're going to run. And then I'll give you a kind of a brief overview. I'm sure a lot of you who are doing testing are aware of TubeBuddy and how that process looks, but I'll kind of give you a brief rundown of that, and then what are some of the things to look at with your results. So at the end of the day, the general framework is we're going to assess the channel and how things are going. We're going to then come up with the design for our test. We're going to run the test, and then we're going to look at the results and assess. And that cycle just continues infinitum until our channels are rocking. So here are some general guidelines that I tend to set for somebody before you consider actually running split tests, because there are TubeBuddy, the way that it operates. You set up your test, and it will alternate that thumbnail test, every single day until it has enough impressions in order for the videos to collect enough data to determine that it's statistically significant to come up with a determination on if the test, improved your thumbnail click-through rate or didn't improve. So, like I said, the big things for your channel is you got to be producing content regularly. If you're not producing content regularly, that is going to impact your that last bullet of your last 90-day impression levels not being at 1,000. And then usually the split testing process doesn't happen until you're at least at 100 videos in your library, because most smaller channels, if you're not producing consistently and you want to make sure that you actually have a backlog of stuff, because if you've only got 10 videos, split testing those 10 videos isn't necessarily going to move the needle for your channel, and that's kind of why producing content consistently is a must and should be the first thing that you attack before going through this process. Does that make sense? So how do we actually determine what we go and test? Well, so if you go into your back end, typically what I will do is in your analytics in the upper right-hand corner, there's the advanced mode button. I'm sure everybody is familiar with that. The advanced mode button basically gives you the ability to kind of see a granular breakdown of every single video that you've released. Typically what I will do is I'll set my time frame to be the last 90 days because I want to see and make sure that I'm picking videos that are actually going to finish the testing in a reasonable amount of time. If you've got a video with 100 impressions in the last 90 days, there's a good chance that one test on that singular video is going to take anywhere from 6 to 12 months to finish. And nobody wants to wait 6 to 12 months to see if you improved your click-through rate from a test. So typically what you'll do is you'll sort all your videos based on impression. And then what you're going to do is you're going to look at impression bands. And I think Evan has talked about this in the past, where basically what you're looking at is for videos with similar levels of impressions, what are the videos that are underperforming the highest click-through rate in that band? So for instance, in this kind of 12,000 range, we can see that we've got one video that's at 4.1%. We've got a 5.6 and a 6. You could argue that this 5.6 should be tested, but if you're trying to prioritize in what is going to move the needle, since this is a 2% difference over a 0.4% difference, it's going to be more efficient for you to focus on this lower one. So basically, we're going to go through each band. We're going to figure out, okay, what are the videos that are underperforming in that band? And then those are going to be the videos that we go after. Then we have to figure out, okay, what kind of test are we going to ultimately run on this? Now, I like to think of testing in kind of two different camps. You've got broad design testing, where you've got a completely new thumbnail template, where you're comparing older templates with that new template. And then you've got element testing, where you're not necessarily changing the overarching design, but you're simply changing out the elements on the page. So this is an example of kind of that broad design testing that Evan is running right now, where he's got, this is an old format, this is the new format that he's running, and he's running tests between those two designs to see if this new design thumbnail template is going to ultimately outperform his older stuff. Now, typically speaking, when you're running this type of test, if you run into a case where the test fails and the new design template doesn't take over the old template, typically speaking, what we'll do is we will run 3 or 4 different tests with the new design template, changing the elements on it, where we're still trying to get the new template to win out over the old one. So, if this one failed, the things you would consider is like, how congruent is the text that I've chosen to the title? Maybe updating the text on the thumbnail would be better. Maybe if it was a mashup type video, maybe we try a different face. So we're specifically looking at the elements, trying to get the new template to overtake the old one. And usually, like I said, after 3 or 4 tests of this, if you cannot get it to outperform the old one, you would then consider saying, okay, I'm going to try a completely different design on this, because for whatever reason, this new design isn't working for this. Or you consider going back to the old template and running some elemental type tests on that to see if you can outperform this. Ultimately, what you're trying to do, like the thought process that you're thinking through, is you're trying to eke out as much performance as you can on a video. But if for whatever reason a template is working, then you would consider going back and just running more element testing on that old thumbnail for that video. And like I said, the main things with when you're doing element design testing is where you're running the same template, but the main thing that you're doing is you're swapping out your faces and your thumbnail text, and those are the main things that you're testing against. Now, just to give you some general guidelines, when you're running an element design test over like a design test, you're going to see more performance gains, like a more drastic change when the full design change is happening. Whereas with an element test, your click-through rate differential is going to be much smaller. At least that has been my experience. I don't know if anybody has had any tests that have gone differently than that, but the big thing with the changing up the elements is primarily you just trying to make more congruency between the thumbnails and whatever titles that you're picking. So what does this process look like? So once you've actually figured out the videos that you want to test and what kind of test you're going to run, you're going to go into TubeBuddy. I made the broad assumption that you probably already have things set up. You're going to do a search for that video that you're looking for. And then primarily when we're running tests, we're mainly focused on doing thumbnail split tests. Typically, if at least in our experience, the biggest gains come from changing out the thumbnail versus changing out the titles. And typically speaking, you're only going to run one test over the other. So if you're specifically looking at the thumbnail, you're only going to test the thumbnail. If you specifically want to test the title, then you're only going to run the title. There are instances where it would make sense to change both the title and the thumbnail, but we have found more often than not that you want to focus on one element at a time to see what that impact that element has on your overarching test. And then so you're going to search for your video, you're going to select your thumbnail click-through rate test, and then you're going to run it to statistical significance. Now, back to kind of when the boundaries of the running the tests, having the impressions be over in the thousands for your 90 days, this is the reason why we have that requirement. Because at the end of the day, as you have lower impressions on a video, what you'll find is those tests will take considerably longer. I've got a couple of clients who they've got a fairly large library, but at the top end, they've only got like 8 or 9 videos that are in the thousands, and the rest of their videos are less than 1,000. And what I'm finding is that more often than not, the videos that are less than 1,000 are taking, like I said, between 6 and 8 months to fully finish. So we're having to test more and more of the more recent videos as a function of just the overall impressions on the older videos are just it's taking a lot longer for things to move along. Cool. So once a test is actually finished, TubeBuddy is going to ultimately give you an idea of like whether or not the thumbnail outperformed the old one. But we want to actually go in and take a look at the results to each of our tests. I have made the mistake a couple of times where you take it for kind of like whatever TubeBuddy says is the winner, and you say, okay, cool, that's the winner. We're going to move on to the next test. But if you don't go in and actually dig deep into the data that TubeBuddy presents, you could miss out on some key factors that I think are very important. And the main thing to look at is where are your traffic sources coming from and where is the click-through rate actually improving. The main thing, as Evan has mentioned in the past, is we really want our click-through rate for suggested to be the thing that we're focused on. TubeBuddy gives you an overarching click-through rate, and you have to dig into the actual traffic sources of where those clicks came from in order to actually figure out if your thumbnail gave you the increase in the area that you wanted. So we want to make sure that our suggested videos, the number of clicks from that for the new thumbnail is higher than the old one. And that should be a focal point that you look at. You want to make sure if this test comes out the other way, we want to make sure that we go back and we want to look and actually go into YouTube. I would go into YouTube and look up that video and look at your traffic sources for that video and just do a confirmation of how is that click-through rate overall on suggested, and did we actually move the needle? Because at the end of the day, if we're not moving the suggested needle, it'll slow down our progress on those videos.
If you want to see this full video as well as train live with me twice a month to blow up your brand, join the BrandLytics training program. There's a link to join right there next to me. Continue to believe. I'll see you there.